isn't just an act of recitation. So the act of offering prayer is not just an act of recitation, even though it is the virtue of speech, but the real purpose of it is to help transform our minds, to make our minds more receptive to all the teachings of the Buddha, and to be present in whatever blessings are being offered to us through our own experiences and through our own understanding. So let's all recite these together. As usual, we'll offer the first one, the refuge and Bodhisattva prayer, 3 times in Tibetan, and then once in English, and then we'll be continuing in English. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janshu pardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jin soki pe sonam gi drola pencher sangye dru parsho. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janshu pardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jin soki pe sonam gi drola pencher sangye dru parsho. Sangye chedan soki chonam la janchu bardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi jola penche sangye dru par shok. I go for refuge and am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from that happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined, and I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Now we'll offer a mandala offering. We'll do this once in Tibetan and once in English. Part of the reason I like doing these offerings in Tibetan is because, one, it keeps us connected to the lineage, to our teachers who have offered us this opportunity to study and practice. But two, when there are tunes and melodies that we can recite that go along with the prayers, it helps the prayers be received more firmly in our heart, at least for me. You know, having a tune, having a melody, it makes the prayer feel stickier, if that makes sense. And we don't tend to have the same melodies for the English translations. So when I have a melody appropriate for the Tibetan, it's nice to offer it in Tibetan so we can at least not only be connected to our teachers and to this lineage of Tibetan Buddhism that has offered us an opportunity to study and practice the Dharma, but it gives us a chance to offer the prayers in a different way that may be more appealing to some of our minds. I remember I was at a teaching with this holiness once where they offered the Heart Sutra, and it was offered maybe a half dozen times in different languages. So first it was in Tibetan, and then in Chinese, and then in Japanese, and then um, in Sanskrit, and then in English. And he kind of made fun of the English recitation because they didn't have any tune to recite, where everyone else had a tune to recite, and the English didn't have a tune. It was very funny. Though to be fair, when we recite the Heart Sutra in Tibetan, there isn't a tune, but there's just a common um, a way we recite it, you know, that feels like a tune, but it isn't a melody. But anyway, being able to recite something with a tune helps it stick in our mind a little bit. So we'll offer the mandala first in Tibetan and then in English. 온 사시필기 조액식매토 Shamri Rabling Shi Ni Degen Pandi Sange Shing Du Mikte Wai Joku Namandak Shing La Chu Parlo. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. Of course, we have to understand the meaning of the prayers, too. That's why we need to do the English as well. We can't do everything in Tibetan if we don't know Tibetan, you know? We have to have the right balance. So continuing with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shaka clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean, like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not. Incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we'll continue with the Heart Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagwan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, The Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell on the perfection of wisdom, the mind that is without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. And therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas will rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. And we will conclude with a prayer to avert hindrances and make sure we have as few obstacles as possible in our time together today. I prostrate to the gathering of the kinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her only child. Akasamarta Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamarta Shadara Samaya Pe, Akasamarta Shadara Samaya. Akasamarta Shadara Samaraya Pe, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may the inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to the Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So, as we begin our class today, as we continue our study, just take a moment right at the beginning to recognize that it is Mother's Day today for those who celebrate Mother's Day. So, for anyone that has a mother or mother-like figure in their life, I rejoice. That's wonderful. Whether they are in their life now or whether it's just the memory of a mother figure, we can rejoice in all of those mother figures who have helped us in this in this life and in all past lives. We can celebrate them in any way that's possible. And I also think it's a good opportunity for us to recognize that we should dedicate our lives to having the type of compassion for other sentient beings that a mother has for her only child, right? That is the paradigm that we often use when we say, how should I live in this world? How should I exist? And how should I develop compassion? The type of compassion, the type of love we should have is should be of the strength that a mother has for her only child, right? If a mother has a sick child, especially, she'd be willing to do anything to help that child. We should be like that with all sentient beings. So I don't want to, commandeer Mother's Day away from celebrating mothers and mother figures. We should do that, but we should also recognize it as an opportunity for us to embody those characteristics that we see, the best characteristics of parents and of parenthood, right? That unmitigated love and compassion. And we should try to cultivate that in ourselves and be mothers to all sentient beings in that way, right? So that we should try to do both of those things on this day. As we begin today, let us just begin by reminding ourselves of one of the ways to appropriately study and receive teachings is to try to do so while avoiding the three faults of a broken or faulty vessel or pot. And I know I repeat these in every class, but it's important that we cultivate these attitudes, right? So if there is a pot that is upside down, then no matter how much water you pour onto it, it'll always stay empty. And in the same way, if our minds are closed, if our minds are not open to receiving new things, then when we engage in the teachings, we won't have any benefit. They won't be of any use. So we want to avoid being like a pot that is upside down and instead have an open mind and be investigative and curious. If a pot is stained and isn't cleaned out properly, then no matter how much crystal clear water you pour into it, it'll be stained and polluted and not usable. And in the same way, when we approach any new teaching or any practice, if we have a mind that is filled with prejudice or with bias, or we think we already know the answer, that it's not worth engaging in this study because we've already figured it out, then we're not going to get any benefit. Again, we're going to taint our experience and not actually be able to develop understanding. So we want to avoid the fault of being like a stained vessel and have a mind that is free from bias and prejudice. And lastly, we want to avoid being like a vessel that has a crack or a hole in it, because no matter how much water you pour in, it'll always be spilled out. It'll never be filled. And in the same way, we want to be attentive. We don't want to let our mind wander. So when we're engaging in a practice, especially, or in a study or a teaching, we want to make sure we are focused to the best of our ability and that our attention and our concentration is on whatever the topic is at hand. So we want to embody these characteristics that avoid the three faults of a faulty vessel. So we want to be open and receptive and curious. We want to be unbiased and unprejudiced. And we want to have a level of concentration and focus that we bring to our practice. So we should try to embody these characteristics. Really, we should try to embody these characteristics all the time, right? Because all the time we're studying, we're learning. It's not like we're only learning when we come together here Sunday mornings, but especially we should remind ourselves of them at the beginning of a teaching. Or if you sit down to study on your own, it's good to just remind yourself of these three things before you open up your book to study, right? It's useful. So that's why we repeat them over and over again. And once we try to adopt these attitudes, let's actually start our practice today with a brief meditation. I've been enjoying doing the 9 round breathing at the beginning of our class. It's helpful for me. Hopefully, it's helpful for you as well to help get us centered and help remove whatever extraneous distractions have still kind of crept into my mind. So, the 9 round breathing meditation is a meditation that allows us to focus on the breath with a little more forcefulness, right? So adopt a comfortable posture, whatever that may be. If you are sitting in a chair, try to be sitting straight upright, not leaning too far back. Try to have your feet flat on the ground if possible. If that's not possible, then just try to adopt whatever is the closest approximation of this posture that you can. If you have to lay down, if you have to stretch out, that's also perfectly fine. But you want to at least try to have your chest as open as possible so you can breathe comfortably so you're not curled in on yourself. So whatever that looks like, given your situation, that's perfectly fine. Let's try to adopt that posture. And now, this particular meditation, we have a visualization to go with it. This meditation, as I've mentioned before, does come from Tantra, but it's appropriate for all of us to practice. So we should visualize the three channels. The central channel, which we visualize about the width of our pinky finger, and it is made of light, and it has the color blue, and it runs right in front of our spine. And it starts at the spot right between our eyebrows, and then it curves up. It follows the curve of our head, and then it goes all the way down to a point about 1 hand width or 4 fingers width below our navel, right? It's made of light, slightly glowing, a light color blue. And then on the right side and on left side are two slightly smaller channels. Those are called the right channel and the left channel. Very imaginative names. The right channel is red in color, and the left channel is white in color. And these both terminate at our nostrils. Okay, so they terminate at our nostrils, and then they come up, and then they run parallel to the central channel, going down our body. And then at that point, one hand width below our navel, they join together, and all three channels form a join right at the bottom. So that's how we visualize these. Okay, and we recognize that in all of these channels, when you get into tantra practice, then in these channels, you visualize the different chakras, right? The different chakras are the places where the left and right channels are crossing around the central channel and causing a knot. And that is preventing us from moving the subtle winds in our body that are motivated by our meditation practice, especially our tantric meditation practice. So that's the utility of recognizing these channels. We're controlling our subtle body. For our purposes here today, we don't have to worry about that. But what we do think about is that these channels allow movement, right? They allow the subtle winds, which our minds ride upon, to move in and out, right? And to expand. And so we visualize as we breathe in, we're going to visualize first breathing in through one nostril. And then as the air comes in, it's flushing out all of the obstacles, all of the pollution, all of the waste. So it's coming in. So we're going to breathe in through our left nostril. And then we visualize the air coming in, going down our left channel, and then at the bottom, it transfers into our right channel. And as we breathe out through the right nostril, it flushes all of the waste, all of the pollution, all of the obstacles out of our channel in that way. So we'll breathe in 3 times through the left nose, and then out through the right, and then 3 times in through the right nostril and out through the left. And then 3 times we'll breathe in through both nostrils, and that we'll visualize as entering in the central channel. And as we breathe out, we visualize that the air is actually coming out of our central channel, even though biologically we'll be breathing out of our nose. At least most of us will be. I don't know. Maybe you have mastered control better than me. But so the visualization will be that it's coming out of our central channel. And in this way, we allow ourselves to clear the channels and also focus our mind a little more firmly. Okay. So we'll use our finger to block our nostrils to aid in our breathing. So we'll first 3 times in through the left, out through the right, and then 3 times in through the right, out through the left, and then 3 times in both. And I'll describe this as we go. And the reason I really like this practice is because normally when we meditate and we use the breath as an object, we allow our breathing to fall into a natural rhythm, right? But here we're going to be breathing in slowly, nice and slow and deep. And then on, we're going to hold for a moment with the breath in. And then we breathe out again, nice and slowly. And then we hold on empty for a moment. So it's not a natural breathing rhythm. And for me, especially when I'm very distracted, this gives me something to grab onto, right? It makes it a little easier than just letting my mind fall into its own distraction. So I often start a meditation session with a quick 9 round practice before I go into a regular mindfulness practice because for me, it helps shake away the cobwebs a little bit. Okay. So let's begin with this. We're going to start, like I said, with breathing in through the left. So in through the left, out through the right, in through the left, out through the right. One last time, in through the left, out through the right. Now in through the right nostril, out through the left, in through the right, out through the left, And one last time into the right channel. And out through the left. And now in through both. Out through the central channel. In through both. Out through the central channel. And one last time in through both. And out through the central channel. And then we can bring our awareness back to the room as we're ready. Great. Thank you. So we're going to continue our study of the Bodhisattva today. I think we're going to be finishing the 5th chapter. That's what it looks like. We'll see. Um, but before we get into that, one of the things that's been on my mind this week is if our motivation is always to achieve Buddhahood, our motivation is always to be of service to others, then it's right to ask the question, how can I be happy now? When I'm engaging in the spiritual practice, is it wrong for me to want happiness? Is it wrong for me to want some sort of peace and contentment in my life, especially when I experience difficult things and when I see the world around me being so crazy? And we say, obviously, that if our only goal for practice is worldly benefit in this life, that's not a Buddhist practice. That's not a Buddhist motivation, right? At the very minimum, we should be practicing for a positive future rebirth. That would be the smallest type of Buddhist motivation. And then to be free from samsara for ourselves alone would be a medium motivation. But as people practicing Mahayana Buddhism, our motivation should be the great motivation, which is to become a Buddha so we can eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. We understand that. That should be our actual heart motivation for all of our activities. And yet, we're suffering in samsara. Is it so wrong to want to have a little bit of a break, right? And I think the truth is, of course not. We just have to find the balance between having short-term and long-term aspirations. And when we realize that it is through working towards Buddhahood, it is through getting rid of our self-cherishing mind and dedicating ourselves to benefiting others, that we actually find contentment in this life. Through this work, through the work that is aimed not at the immediate benefits of this life. By not focusing on that, that's what comes about. Right? Now, that's not to say that we'll be experiencing, rainbows and puppies all the time. That's not what it means. But it means that our mind will be in such a place that no matter what we experience, we take it with a sense of contentment and with a sense of joy. Right? We're able to cultivate joy and peace regardless of what's going on in our lives. And that happens because we do the work of taming our mind, and we do that with the intention to be of service to others. We stop allowing our self-cherishing mind and our self-grasping minds be the center of our story. We stop living our life revolving around those afflictions. And as a result of that, we actually experience contentment and happiness. So we have to keep that in mind. But it is okay to want to be happy. It is okay not to want to be upset all the time. And it's easy to be upset because this is samsara. Even if there weren't these egregious examples on the news, even if we didn't have, a suffering machine in our pockets all the time that tells us what's happening 24 hours a day, this is still samsara. It's still samsara. Mobile phones and technology make it easier to be upset, but it's not new, right? It's the same suffering that experienced at the time of the Buddha, and it's the same suffering that all of our teachers have experienced, at the times of all of our teachers, rather. It's nothing new. Just the means of communication is new. So we aren't exempt from suffering and we don't have special types of suffering. Instead, we need to recognize that all of the Buddhist teachings are to lead all sentient beings out of suffering. And by dedicating ourselves to that, we're able to actually experience happiness, contentment, and peace. That can't be our primary goal, but it's okay to have that as a secondary goal, right? It's perfectly fine because we're suffering sentient beings and samsara is hard. We're doing the best we can. So we have to always keep in mind the long-term view, but it's okay to want to be happy. You know, I sometimes worry when I give teachings, if I don't make that clear, people are going to think that they need to be beating up on themselves all the time, right? That Buddhism is about this kind of masochistic idea that it doesn't matter if I suffer, I should suffer because then everyone else will be happy. That's not true. We don't want anyone to suffer, and that includes yourself, right? One of the foundational basis for our practice is renunciation. And what renunciation is we renounce the suffering of samsara. It's not renouncing happiness. It's not renouncing pleasure. It's renouncing attachment to all of these things in our life that cause us suffering and renouncing samsara. So we need to start with our own wish to be free from suffering. And from that as the basis, we build up the wish for others to be free from suffering as well. So it's appropriate, right? We just have to recognize that by having these long-term aspirations, the real wish to become a Buddha, to serve others, that is actually benefiting our here and now in ways that are incalculable. When we're always focusing on that, always dedicating our lives to being of service to others in this life and in future lives, that's actually improving our immediate experiences. And so we have to develop conviction in that. And the way we develop conviction is by study and then by putting it into practice and then observing our practice. You know, doing it once or twice isn't going to give you an answer. But if you develop some conviction in the teachings through our act of study together and through your own reflection, then you put that into practice, both in your meditation practice and in your everyday life. You go through your life trying to say, what happens if I bring compassion to be the foremost thought that motivates all of my activities, no matter what I'm doing, if I'm at work or at school or with my family? What happens? And do that for a week, for a month, like that. And then check and see how has your experience in that month changed? Do you feel the same as you did before? Or has there been a subtle shift? Right? It's through our observation that our conviction is then made even stronger. And as that happens, then our conviction gets greater and our practice becomes deeper. It becomes less artificial, less intellectual, and more experiential. So then the question, as we're studying now in this chapter, is this chapter, especially this chapter 5 and chapter 4 of the text, is focused on the perfection of morality or the perfection of ethical discipline, right? That's what is being taught to us, um, implicitly, at least. So, how does morality bring about happiness here and now? How does morality bring about peace here and now? Especially because we've talked about three types of morality, right? The morality of restraint, which is the morality usually associated with vows that is preventing us, or the morality of not engaging in non-virtuous activities, right? So upholding our vows and not following non-virtue, that's the morality or ethical discipline of restraint. And then the other two types of morality, the one we spoke about last week in our verses last week, is the morality of gathering virtue or collecting virtuous activities. So that shows that morality is not just the switch that beats us, but it's also, the carrot that we're seeking out. It's both of those things. Okay. Morality is not just avoiding non-virtue, it's also actively pursuing virtue. And then the third morality is the morality of working for the welfare or the benefit of other sentient beings. Now, the truth is, those last two overlap quite a lot. And almost any virtuous activity of body or speech that is done with the motivation to benefit others is going to fall into the category of the morality of collecting virtue. And most of those will also fall into the category of the morality of working for the welfare of other sentient beings. So they're not these distinct groups, right? We're doing a lot of these things at once. But how does that morality, how does following virtue actually and avoiding non-virtue, how does that benefit us here and now? And so we'd say the first way it benefits us is that if we look at all of the Buddhist teachings, right, we can say that they're all contained in what are called the three higher trainings: the higher training of morality, the higher training of concentration, and the higher training of wisdom. Okay. And it's through these three higher trainings that all of the Buddhist teachings are categorized, are included, and we practice them through them. And the higher training of morality has to be the basis. It has to serve as the foundation upon which we develop all of our other practices that are included in concentration, which include all the practices of the paramitas, and that are included in wisdom, right? So we need that morality first and foremost as a foundational practice. Because if we don't have a sense of morality, which is to say avoiding non-virtue and seeking out virtue, then as a result of that, all of our other practices are not going to have any solidity. So they may still be beneficial, but then when, they're very easily dismissed. We lose them very quickly because we don't have that strong foundation that's holding them up. So in one regard, morality is important just because it serves as the basis upon which all of our other practices are built. But then on its own, it still is incredibly beneficial to our immediate life here and now. And we can just look at our lives when we know that we have practiced minds of restraint. That's a good feeling, right? When we seek out and engage in virtuous activities, when we help others, and that makes us feel good. I'm sure we've all had that experience, right? Now, sometimes it may be mixed with a little bit of pride, a little bit of self-cherishing. We have to be careful about that. But when we go out of our way to be of service to others, or when we go out of our way to restrain ourselves from following an impulse that we know is not a good impulse, you know, let's say we have an impulse to, uh, we hear some juicy gossip, and our first impulse is to go share it with someone and to, spread these stories about someone else. And then we say, wait, I know that's not going to benefit me. It's not going to benefit them. I'm going to restrain, even though I have all of this, all this uh, electrical impulse to go do this. I'm going to hold back. I'm not going to do it. And then when you actually restrain from that, you restrain from that non-virtuous activity, it feels good, right? To be like, I actually conquered that impulse. Because the whole part of this Buddhist practice is recognizing that we're following these bad habits that we've accumulated and perpetuated since beginningless time. These following of non-virtue, right? All these activities isn't because we're bad people. It's because we've gotten into the habit of following non-virtuous activities and not recognizing them as being dangerous, not recognizing them as being harmful. We don't see that our mind, our ignorant mind, that is affecting how we perceive the world around us, we don't realize that we're chasing after that instead of trying to avoid it. So when we have an opportunity to see that in action and then subdue it and not act on those harmful impulses or on those afflicted impulses, that feels good, right? It feels like we've made some progress. So even in the here and now, we can see that engaging in virtuous behavior and avoiding non-virtuous behavior, it makes us feel joy and contentment. And that in and of itself fuels our practice more. Because once we have a taste of it, we say, I can do that all the time. Because that isn't about me collecting things from the outside. That isn't about me paying a lot of money to go to a retreat or go to a spa. That isn't about me buying new things. That's about me taming my mind, which I can do all the time. That's the one thing I am never separate from, is my mind, right? So the more we practice it, the better we feel, and we have more opportunity to practice it more and more. So morality serves as an incredible basis, but also the act of morality, whether it is prescriptive, which is to say engaging in virtue, or proscriptive, which is to say avoiding non-virtue, it tames our mind. And taming the mind means we're rearranging all of our habits, all of our predispositions. And by rearranging them to always align with virtue, what we're doing is we are seeking out joy and serenity in any situation, right? We're giving ourselves the opportunity to not be overwhelmed by the afflicted minds. And so our actions of body, speech, and mind that are leaning towards non-virtue or that are avoiding engaging in virtue, those are never going to bring us happiness. But so by doing the opposite of that, by avoiding non-virtue and moving toward virtue, what we're doing is creating more opportunities to discover joy, to discover happiness, to discover serenity and contentment, right? We're multiplying our chances of finding these things, and we're looking for them in new places that we never thought to look before. And when we do that, we can experience them. We're no longer stirred up by these emotional superimpositions or by the distractions of our afflicted minds. And since we're not stirred up, since we've tamed the mind, at least to some extent, and we don't have this agitation, then we can see joy and happiness when it comes. And we can experience it and not grab onto it, not hold it too tight, but experience it, rejoice in it, and then move on. If we hold on to it too tight, then when it goes away, we're just gonna be more miserable. So we have to find that balance. But that is the benefit of starting with morality, of having morality as one of our foundational practices. And so in these chapters, chapter 4 and 5, we're studying conscientiousness and awareness and mindfulness as a means to generate morality, right? Chapter 4 is all about developing conscientiousness, which is to say, recognizing where you are in the world around you and how you're affecting the people in the space around you, how your actions of body, speech, and mind are affecting your environment, and how your environment is affecting you. And then in chapter 5, the main focus is about um, karasana, awareness. Protecting our awareness is what it's called, or our introspection. And that goes hand in hand with mindfulness. And the purpose of that is once we have developed some understanding of our conscientiousness, that we are existing in the world in an intentional way, now our awareness is looking at our mind, is looking at ourself. It's a mental factor that is constantly looking inward and saying, am I actually pursuing virtue? What is actually going on? What are the emotional realities that are coming to the surface? Do I have control over them, or are they controlling me? Right? And so the reason that those are used to develop ethical discipline or morality is because we learn to observe that our mental actions more clearly. All of our actions of body and speech are preceded by a mental action. And quite often, that mental action is rooted in an affliction because we've been pursuing the afflictions mindlessly since beginningless time. So when we have this introspection, we can see all of our mental actions more clearly. We can see the afflictions when they come up. We can see our virtuous minds when they come up. And we can then pursue the ones we want to pursue, and we can abandon the ones we want to abandon. But we need to have that introspection to actually be aware of what's going on. So we're not acting blindly. We're not acting out of this reactionary stance. Instead, we're acting intentionally. So that way, we're not allowing ourselves to be lost in these reactionary emotions. We are recognizing our emotions, right? We're acknowledging them, but we're not allowing ourselves to identify with them. This is so an example of how this is useful and important. Maybe it's a little bit of a bummer of an example, but maybe it's useful. I don't know. Um, so as most of you know, or many of you know, I have two puppies that I live with here, and one of them passed away this week, right? The older one, Karchu, who was 12 years old, I believe. The short version is we went to the vet on Wednesday because he wasn't feeling well. Excuse me, went to the vet on Tuesday because he wasn't feeling well. The vet said he needed surgery. He did all the tests. He was cleared for surgery. Supposed to have surgery Wednesday morning, and then he stopped breathing in his sleep overnight and never had surgery. So that's a bummer, right? That doesn't feel good. Um, However, so I can feel that grief. I feel that loss. I feel sadness. But I am not my sadness. So I can experience that emotion. And then I look at it and I say, why do I have this emotion of grief, of sadness? Does that emotion come because I am actually missing this being who is such a wonderful companion? Or does it come from me wanting my own happiness? It wants me to feel comfort of him. It wants me to have the relationship. So what is that sadness focused on? Is it focused on missing a friend, or is it focused on me and my mind and what I don't get anymore? Right. And when I do that, I can recognize that my grief comes because I had joy. Right. So the beauty of grief is that it reminds us that there was joy that we had in our lives. Without joy, we wouldn't have grief. Without happiness, we wouldn't experience loss in a meaningful way. So what I can do is when I feel this sadness, which is there, right? It's not going away immediately. It's there, it's present. I look at it, but I'm not overwhelmed by it. So I can see that sadness operating in my mind, and I can try to analyze where is it coming from? What are the different motivating factors? Is that sadness just woe is me, pity me, everything goes wrong for me? How come this happened to me? Or is it a genuine grief at the loss of a friend? And those aren't the same thing, right? They're often mixed together. Our self-cherishing mind mixes all of our virtues with itself. So it's hard for us to separate them, but we have to. And we say that I can miss losing a friend without being self-cherishing, without having it be about me, right? And I can experience that grief and I can recognize that grief as a celebration of the joy that I had in my life. But the important part is by doing the work, I am not making myself associated with my grief. Or what I mean by that is I am not my sadness, right? I'm not letting it overwhelm me. I'm not letting it control my life, and I'm not letting it motivate how I behave in the world. I'm experiencing it, I'm acknowledging it. I'm not pretending it isn't there because that's not useful, right? I'm acknowledging it, but then I am not letting it rob me of the opportunity for joy and love and kindness and peace and serenity. And in fact, I'm looking at that sadness as an expression of my joy, right? I look at grief as an expression of the love that I had for Kartru and for my other companions and for my friends and my family. and what I try to cultivate for all sentient beings. I'm not always good at it, but I try to, right? So we don't have to let our reactionary emotions overwhelm us. And now I'm not saying I'm an expert at it, right? I'm obviously just the same as everyone else. I'm still practicing. I'm doing the best I can. And, when we experience loss, especially, it's easy for us to have moments of being overwhelmed by it. And that's appropriate because we are samsaric beings and samsara is difficult. So that's fine. There's not going to beat yourself up over being sad, over losing someone. But when you're able to, it's good to take a step back and just observe that sadness, observe that grief, and see, am I allowing this to control my happiness or not? Am I allowing this to overwhelm me? Or is it an opportunity to celebrate the joy that I had? And by celebrating joy, by celebrating happiness, what we're doing is creating the opportunity to experience more happiness in the future. That's the whole purpose of creating new habits. Is we seek out habits that align us with virtue, that associate joy and virtue, so that we don't have any distinction between virtuous activity and joyful activity. That our happiness comes through our moral discipline that guides us towards Buddhahood by serving others in a meaningful way. And that all comes down to looking at our own minds, taming our own minds, observing what we are feeling, why we are feeling it, and how is it affecting us. Not being led around by minds unintentionally, but having control over our minds. So that's not to say, and again, I said it was a bummer of an example. I apologize. Um, Obviously, it's been on my mind. And I think it's a good example because it's something we all experience, right? Whether it's a pet or a family member or a friend, or even just seeing people that are dear to us that we may, that we have some sort of parasocial relationship in the news, you know? Um, think of all the people that were so wildly devastated when JFK was killed or when Princess Di died, right? These people that you don't have any relationship to, but you have some sort of parasocial relationship to. Whether that's healthy or not is a secondary question. But we experience grief, we experience loss. That is inevitable because we're suffering in samsara. As samsaric beings, our lives are destined to be filled with, or not filled with, excuse me, but they're destined to be marked by old age, sickness, and death. We can't avoid those things. That's what it means to have this contaminated aggregate of a body, which is why, by definition, we have the experience of samsara. So, since we can't avoid them, we shouldn't try to avoid them. We need to bring them into our practice. And if we can't bring them into if we don't bring them into our practice before we're actively experiencing them, then when they come, it's much harder. It's a lot harder. The only reason that I am able to have some level of equanimity regarding this loss of my friend is because I've done work, right? I've meditated on this. I've brought this into my practice. I've tried to look in my mind to see what my relationships are made of, to see where my happiness comes from, where my sadness comes from, and to try to actively not pursue those minds that are causing harm to myself or others. But that it isn't overnight, right? So we develop introspection as a tool to be aware of what's going on in our mind. And by guarding our minds with introspection and with mindfulness, so these two often go hand in hand, right? Mindfulness is our ability to stay focused and to remember whatever it is what we're focused on. So in meditation, we'll have an object that we're focused on, and our mindfulness is always drawing us to that object. And when we're not in active meditation, when we're just living in the world, we want our mindfulness to always be remembering virtue. The word for mindfulness in Tibetan is drempa, and in Sanskrit is smriti. And these both are the same words that are used to say memory as well, right? In different contexts. So mindfulness and memory are actually the same concept. So our mindfulness remembers whatever it is we're focused on. In this case, it's going to be virtue in general. And our introspection is then checking to make sure that we're actually pursuing that virtue and that we're not going astray. And because of doing that, we're able to prevent ourselves from being overwhelmed by the afflictions. We prevent ourselves from following blindly our anger, our attachment, and our ignorance. And that brings us, it may seem like a lot of work because it is a lot of work because we're not used to it. But what happens as a result of that is not only are we preparing ourselves to have happiness in the future, but we are creating happiness right here and now. We are observing all of the opportunities for joy and happiness and contentment that we have right now available to us that we have been ignoring because we've been focusing on our sadness, we've been focusing on our anger, we've been focusing on our attachment and ignoring all the opportunities for happiness that are around us right now. The happiness that comes from contentment, the happiness that comes from pursuing virtue. So by focusing on our mind, by taming our mind, by using introspection as the tool by which we observe what's going on in our mind, we're able to then create the field upon which we grow our own happiness, right? So with that, I guess one more thing is to remember that introspection is a tool. We need it to help us develop our renunciation, our compassion, our bodhisattva, and our wisdom. But on its own, introspection is just a level of awareness, right? It's just looking at our mind and seeing what it's doing. It's neutral. So, in addition to introspection, we then have to use that knowledge. Okay, this is what my mind is doing. This is how my mind is operating. This is what all the causal factors are. Once we have that knowledge, then we have to then apply the antidotes to the afflictions. We have to actually actively pursue virtue. Just being aware of it isn't enough. We have to then take that knowledge and do something with it. We have to act in the world. So, where we are in the text as we're studying the morality of engaging in virtue, which was last week, and this week it's going to be the morality of working for the welfare of sentient beings. That is one way to apply this activity, to apply this practice, rather. And so, with that, we will go to the text, and I think we'll be able to finish the text this week because these are very straightforward. And again, this chapter has a lot of common sense advice. So, we will go to the text, and we are on verse 85, excuse me, 84 at the moment. So, verse 84 is where we begin the section on how to train in morality that accomplishes the welfare of sentient beings. So, before this, the main important part of this chapter is recognizing that our mind itself can be our greatest enemy if it is uncontrolled and untamed, because it's our mind that is seeking after self cherishing and self grasping that causes us to pursue non virtue. That non virtue harms ourselves and others in this life and in future lives. Therefore, our greatest enemy is our own mind. If we do not tame it, we do not control it. Right? That's the important thing to remember. The flip side of that is our mind is also the source of all of our joy and happiness when it is tamed and when it is controlled. So both of those things are important to remember, and that is the heart of this chapter, is that our mind is the only enemy we need to defeat. When we defeat that enemy, then we've defeated all external enemies. Okay? And so we've already discussed how the mind operates in that way, how we develop mindfulness in that way, how our introspection works with mindfulness. That's already come up in this chapter. And we've already discussed the different types of morality about avoiding non-virtue and the morality of restraint. And then last week, we had a number of verses that were instructing us on the morality of gathering virtue or collecting virtuous activity. And now these next few verses will be about the training in morality of how to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings. So starting with verse 84, it says, when this is all understood, is well understood, I should always strive for the welfare of others. The far-seeing merciful ones have allowed a bodhisattva to do some actions that for others were forbidden. So this is referencing earlier, we talked about the how to practice the different levels of the perfections and how to engage in virtuous activity where we always seek out the greatest virtue. We don't sacrifice a big virtue in order to do something small, right? We should always seek out whatever is the most virtuous. And this is saying once we know that, once we actually develop a mind of actual bodhicitta, then we can see that as long as we're working to benefit others, it's okay to have occasional engage in actions that might otherwise be forbidden. And so, what's important to know about this verse is that when we say that we have been allowed, like the Bodhisattva has been allowed, that doesn't mean that you can get permission to engage in non-virtue, and that permission is what uh, mediates or mitigates the non-virtue, right? There's no external force giving us permission or not, even though that's the language used here. What it means is when you actually have a pure mind of bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings, that isn't focused on your own happiness, but instead is focused on the happiness of others. And that mind is entirely uncontrived, that is omnipresent in your continuum and doesn't take any effort to be there. When you have that mind, that's so powerful, then your actions become virtuous. And for instance, there's the example of it may be possible to steal if you are stealing to feed others. If you're stealing from the rich to give to the poor, let's say you're properly Robin Hooding it, that's possible to do and to be beneficial if you have a pure mind of bodhicitta. And if you don't have any attachment, any anger, any sense of of jealousy, right? Now, the example we get in the sutras is actually from the Jataka tales. There's an example that we hear all the time of a past life when Shakyamuni Buddha was not yet a Buddha, he was still a Bodhisattva, and he was on a merchant vessel that had 500 merchants, and that ship was attacked by a pirate, and that pirate was going to kill all of the 500 merchants. And the Buddha recognized this, and so out of compassion for the pirate, he killed the pirate first. And he did so not because he wanted his compassion was only for the 500 merchants who are going to lose their lives, but he recognized that if the pirate engaged in that act of violence, he would create such great negativity, he would be reborn in hell realms for countless eons. And that is what really motivated his compassion. So without even a moment of anger, without the smallest glimpse of anger or any afflicted mind, he acted out of compassion and bodhicitta, right? Now, however, the important thing to remember about that story and also about the example of stealing from the rich in order to help the poor, it's still non-virtuous. You're still going to accumulate some non-virtuous karma, right? But it is going to be overwhelmed by the virtuous motivation that precedes it. So it shows us that even when we talk about non-virtuous karma as black and virtuous karma as white, the reality is that most often it's mixed. And a proper mind of bodhicitta, so a mind that is purely motivated and that motivation is strong and clear, it's going to be predominantly virtuous, even if the actions you're doing are normally considered negative actions. So this is not something that I think is useful for us to take into our practice all the time, right? We shouldn't be giving ourselves the excuse to go engage in non-virtue because we say, no, 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 it's for a good reason, right? That's not, most of us don't have that capacity. But this is showing that if you actually have bodhicitta, when you actually develop a mind that's that powerful, then that mind is so powerful, then it's appropriate, possibly, to engage in activities that normally you wouldn't. So for me, this isn't permission to seek out non-virtue and to dress it up with the line that I'm trying to help others, therefore it's acceptable. Because I know that my mind is not that refined. I know that I don't have actual bodhicitta. I know that anytime I pursue non-virtue, there's going to be the self-cherishing mind that is wanting me and mine, right? That's seeking out my own happiness, or is motivated by anger in a way that is subtle and I don't perceive it. So this isn't something that I practice. This is more for me a celebration of the power of bodhicitta and the power of virtuous motivation. And that allows me to then embrace engaging in a bodhicitta motivation with everything I do with greater strength because I can celebrate how powerful it can be as I continue to nurture it and I continue to strengthen it. So that's what this verse is reminding us. 85 says, I should divide my food amongst those who have fallen to the lower realms, those without protection and practitioners, and eat merely what is sufficient for myself. Except for these 3 robes, I may give it all away. Now, of course, this is again addressed to an audience of monks. So when it says, except for these 3 robes, I may give it all away, that is all the possessions a monk needs, supposedly. According to the Vinaya, there are a number of other possessions that we're allowed to have, including a begging bowl, including a mat to sleep on, including a broom to sweep the ground in front of us, right? A water filter to make sure our water doesn't have any sentient beings in it. There are a number of possessions historically the monks were allowed to possess. But you have to remember that the earliest monks were truly homeless, truly following the Buddha around India and not staying at any one place for a long time. The longest they stayed anywhere was during the rainy season, where they camped out to do a retreat, and that was to avoid causing harm to the sentient beings that come out of the ground when there is a strong rain, right? Other than that, they were constantly on the move. So even for those who aren't ordained, this is a good attitude that we say, what do I really need to survive? And what do I need to practice? This isn't, again, we're not seeking out some masochist tendencies. We want our lives to be comfortable. If we have the fiscal resources to have comfortable lives, then that's perfectly acceptable. But we should always be saying, is this useful to me to have comfort? And then is that comfort allowing me to engage in practice in a meaningful way? And if it's not helping us engage in practice, then maybe we don't need it. It's worth investigating, you know? So it's fine to have nice things and it's fine to be comfortable, but we should always try to distinguish between what we need and what we want. And um, always embrace the things that we need to be and make our lives, our bodies, and our practice as fulfilling as possible. But realize that sometimes the things we want are simply samsara, and we don't always need those. And so that is a matter of reflection and looking inward, right? So even for those who aren't ordained, this is useful advice to say, I can give up everything I don't need. And I can be very clear about these things that I need. And they make my life happier. They make my life better. And they make it better for me to practice. But aside from that, I can have less. A good example for it's easy to go too far to one side. So here in my house a couple years ago, well, probably more than a couple years ago now, but I bought a washing machine, right? And before that, we always do our washing by hand. And that's just the way you used to have a hand pump. Now we have an electric pump, but all the washing you do by hand. And I looked at a washing machine and I said, I don't really need a washing machine. I don't have a lot of clothes. I only do washing once a week. It only takes a couple hours. I don't really need a washing machine, right? I can do it by hand. But then some friends got one, and I said, okay, maybe it's worth spending the money and getting one. And so I got a washing machine. And the amount of benefit from having that washing machine, like that simple tool, is huge. It saves so much time and energy, and it makes my life so much easier, right? So I didn't need a washing machine desperately. I could survive without one, but having one has made my life more comfortable, and that comfort has directly translated into my ability to practice in a meaningful way, right? So am I attached to that washing machine? I certainly hope not. I certainly hope I could go without it and I would be okay. However, having it has made my life better, has made my life easier. And that ease then translates into my study and my practice. So it's okay to have things as long as we are not controlled by those things. And so this verse is reminding us that I should give away and I should give away whatever I can. I should offer whatever I can. And I should be very conscious of what I need versus what I want.
Venerable, Venerable,
Yes.
uh, I'll ask a question. If you want me to ask it later, I could do that also. But then it in terms of buying or whatever, art and,
Mhm.
or, going to, music
Yeah,
concerts
yeah.
and,
Going to a concert or something. Okay.
yeah, or to the theater, as in, and supporting various forms of art. So that's
Mhm.
a not beneficial activity according to this thing.
No, no, no. That's not true at all.
Okay.
I mean, again, any activity can be non-virtuous if you do it with a bad motivation. Putting that aside, um, I think art, whether it is visual arts or performing arts, um, it's one of the most important ways we can connect to our minds, right? It's amazing how moved we can be by a piece of art, right? It's amazing how you can either see something or hear something and it transports you somewhere, in some meaningful way. So I think the arts are incredibly powerful. I think the arts in general are a really wonderful way for us to have a chance to observe ourselves and to celebrate what it means to be alive, right? We can celebrate our opportunities without celebrating samsara. And I think that the arts are one way we can do that. So I am 100% in support of the arts, and I think the Buddha did as well. I think, there's a whole genre of opera, of Tibetan opera, um, which it may not be the most contemporary or exciting thing, but it does exist. And His Holiness Dalai Lama has said it's important to translate a lot of these texts to make them available because celebrating that art form is something we should do. Right. So I think that we can celebrate and support the arts, and that is meaningful. I think we can find meaning through participating in the arts, especially if we take all of the spiritual practice that we're doing and the mind that we've cultivated through our spiritual practice, and then apply that to our engagement with the arts, whatever it may be, whether it be music or TV or the opera or a play or visual art, a painting, right? We can apply a spiritual experience, or rather, our mind of spiritual practice to the arts and get huge, huge benefit out of it. Um, so, no, I don't think this is saying that the arts are frivolous and not worth pursuing. I think it is saying that they're worth pursuing with the right kind of mindset, right? If you look at contemporary art right now, most people that are buying contemporary art, and I mean like expensive contemporary art, are buying it so they can put it in a warehouse because it's an asset. The art that you sell, like Picasso's and these kind of things that aren't in museums that are held by private collectors, are only bought, not only, primarily bought as a way of asset management. That's why people buy art these days, which is insane. They buy these amazing paintings or these amazing sculptures and then put them in a warehouse where it's climate controlled, where they can then use them as a way to make money in the future. And they sell them when the profit goes up. So that is not a useful way to engage in the arts, right? And Obviously, those of us that don't have millions of dollars aren't going to be doing that. However, we should say, why am I engaging in this art? Am I doing it just because I want a distraction? Am I doing it because I'm pursuing any of my afflicted minds because it's making me excited in some way? Or am I doing it because I find this a meaningful way to understand the world around me, to understand something new, to open my mind to new experiences. And by doing that, I give myself more tools to be a benefit to others. So always have to watch our minds, but I think the arts are a critical part, or can be a critical part of our development and of our working to benefit others.
Yes, thank you, Venerable, for clarifying.
So you're allowed to go to the theater. It's okay. I've had experiences where I've been to art museums and you just see these paintings and they like knock you over, right? And I don't know if you've had those experiences, but I've had those moments where I'm just totally blown away by human capacity to create something so gorgeous and so meaningful and so full of emotion. And all it is pigments on a page or on a screen or on a canvas, rather, right? Or there's music and there's songs that when I hear them, they evoke something so strongly in me, and I can't explain why, right? So I think we've all had those experiences, so we can use them in a meaningful way. Um, okay, let's continue because we will finish today, I promise. Even though we're running short, we're running fast. Anyway, continuing. This body, which is being used for the sacred Dharma, should not be harmed only for slight benefit. By my behaving in this way, the wishes of all beings will be quickly fulfilled. So this actually goes back to verse 70, if you remember. Verse 70 tells us, here it is. I should conceive of my body as a boat, a mere support for coming and going in order to benefit all others, and I transform it into a wish-fulfilling body. So that's reminding us that we should take care of our bodies and we should use our bodies in a meaningful way, which means we take care of our health. We do what we have to do to make sure that our bodies are functioning the best that they can, because then we can use them. So here it's saying I should not harm my body if it's not going to be of any big benefit, you know? So there are some people who aren't able to do Nyungne retreats, right? These are fasting retreats because they might have some medical disposition that doesn't allow them to. We shouldn't harm our body if the benefit is only small in that way. Um, Now, again, this isn't an excuse to then say, well, I have to go to the spa. I have to go take care of myself. I have to spend a whole lot of money on luxury skin creams or whatever it may be, because that is how I nurture my body. We don't get that excuse. This isn't giving us an excuse to go be overindulgent, but it is saying that we shouldn't harm our body if it's not going to offer benefit. And that goes into the next verse, right? Which says, those who lack the pure intention of compassion should not give their body away. Instead, both in this and future lives, they should give their body to the cause of fulfilling the great purpose. The great purpose being becoming a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. So when we study bodhicitta and we study compassion, we're often given the example that we should be willing to give up our body for the sake of even one sentient being. And we're told the story of the Buddha in a past life when he gave up his body to feed the hungry tigress who was so emaciated that she was going to eat her own cubs. And instead of allowing that to happen, he took his own life and he gave his body to hers freely out of pure compassion. That is the example that we hold up, that we should be trying to fulfill. And that is true, but that's not possible for most of us to do. For most of us to do. He was able to do that in that past life because he was a Bodhisattva that had high levels of realization and had no attachment to his body. We don't have that. So this is saying those who don't actually have pure compassion shouldn't be doing that. We should aspire to it. Excuse me, not pure compassion, pure bodhicitta. We should aspire to it, right? But until we actually have a certain level of bodhicitta, we're not going to be able to do it. It's generally taught that we have to have not only bodhicitta, but a direct realization of emptiness before we could actually give away our bodies, which means we should be achieving the path of seeing. Now, there are other teachers and other teachings who say we don't have to quite achieve the path of seeing. It's possible for bodhisattvas who have achieved the middling path of the path of accumulation, which is the first path, the middling part of it. Because at that point, when you first develop actual bodhicitta, you achieve the small path of accumulation. But at that point, your bodhicitta can still degenerate. You can still fall off of the bodhisattva path. When you achieve the middling path, of accumulation, of the middling Mahayana path of accumulation, then your Bodhisattva can never degenerate. It can only increase. And therefore it's called gold-like bodhicitta, or bodhicitta that is like gold. And so they say in the teachings that when you achieve that state, then it starts to become possible to possibly give up your body in order to benefit others. But until then, no way. No way. So we should not do anything to harm our body if there's not going to be some benefit, you know? And we should definitely not think of giving up our body until we've achieved actual bodhicitta. Now, we should aspire to it. Again, we should aspire to a thing. We should look at how bodhisattvas behave and what they do and realize that's our goal, but we're not there yet. So we're working toward having a mind that is able to do that. Okay? And now, remember, this is all about how do we benefit sentient beings. So this is the morality of how to accomplish other sentient beings' welfare. And it's reminding us that to accomplish their welfare, we have to take care of ourselves. Part of accomplishing the welfare of others is making sure that we have the means, the resources, and the techniques available to us that allow us to be of service to others. So that's what these first verses are reminding us. And then we get to verse 88. And these ones, from verse 88 and 89, are about how to benefit others through protecting the Dharma, right? So 88 says the Dharma should not be explained to those who lack respect, to those who, like sick men, wear cloths around their heads, to those holding umbrellas, sticks, or weapons, or to those with covered heads. Um, Nor to a woman unaccompanied by a man. The vast and profound should not be taught to lesser beings, although I should always pay equal respect to the dharmas of the lesser and higher beings. So these are all showing different places where it is inappropriate to explain the Dharma. And what that is saying is most of these, especially in verse 88, are all culturally defined, right? So these, we don't have to worry about the specifics of these as much as recognizing that at the time of Shantideva, these are all instances of showing cultural disrespect. So someone that is not in a, showing respect, you shouldn't be teaching the Dharma to them because you don't want to sully the Dharma in that way. So, um, which is why we encourage people when they come to the Dharma Center to, uh, not to dress up. You don't have to wear your best clothes, but you're not just like in your pajamas. And even when you attend a teaching online like this, I know a lot of you have your cameras off. Maybe that's fine, but you should, not just be in your pajamas like that. You should try to be appropriate as if you are actually in the presence of the Dharma, in the presence of a Buddha. How would you carry yourself if you're in the presence of a Buddha? No, I'm not saying that. I'm definitely not saying that I'm a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. But whenever you receive teachings, you should have in your mind that I am holding myself as if I was in the presence of the Buddha because I am receiving an explanation of the Buddha's Dharma. And the Buddha Dharma is the most important thing. That is the actual source of refuge. That is what is going to lead me and all sentient beings out of suffering. So therefore, I have to show respect for it. And so this text, which is being taught to monks, is saying that when you teach the Dharma, in order to actually protect the Dharma itself, you should make sure not to teach it in inappropriate circumstances, right? You shouldn't teach to people who are inappropriate vessels. And that is not a fault on them. It's a fault on you as a teacher if you are bringing the Dharma and not holding it in an appropriate way. And so this reminds us that when it goes on in verse 90, let me, no, excuse me, verse 89. So to clarify, not to a woman unaccompanied by a man. Again, that has nothing to do with the object who's receiving teachings, which is to say the woman. It has to do with the fact that as a monk teaching, we have monastic guidelines about being alone with women who are not relatives of us, right? And it has nothing to do with the women. It has to do with the monks preserving their own ability to master their self-control. And it also has to do, more importantly, with the perception of others. And this comes up again in one of the other verses very shortly. Um, you don't want to ever put yourself as a monk in a position where others can observe you and say that that monk who is a representative of the teachings of the Buddha is behaving inappropriately. Therefore, the Dharma isn't worthwhile, right? We don't ever want to put yourself in that position. And this is something that has, we've seen teachers abuse their power, right? In both Buddhist teachers and non-Buddhist teachers all over the world. And so as a teacher, we are hesitant to ever be alone in a room with a door closed with a student because we don't ever want to give the appearance of impropriety, even if there's nothing there, even if nothing's going on. We have a perfectly pure mind. The student has a perfectly pure mind. Yet from the outside, you don't ever want to appear that you could be doing something improper because that can cause people to have bad opinions of the Dharma. As a fully ordained monk, I think I mentioned before, a fully ordained monk has 253 vows. A whole lot of our vows are about making sure that we represent the Dharma in a way that doesn't cause lay people to lose their respect for the Dharma. And so when you say that I shouldn't teach to a woman that is not accompanied by a man, what that means is I should not teach I should not be in a situation where others from the outside could look at it and misunderstand what is going on. Um, it's important to say that it's easy to read this text because this text was focused and taught to a group of monks. So it's all the gender is always in one direction in all of these. It's very easy to misunderstand it, or not, excuse me, misunderstand it, but if you to take it in a way that seems misogynist or patriarchal, and it isn't. It is um, identifying what could be the misperception of others. So if you are a woman teaching in the same way, you shouldn't be teaching alone to a man. And if it's in an environment that could cause people to have a bad perception. Now, of course, these are all very heteronormative ideas in the time of the Buddha and in the time of Shantideva that persisted everywhere. It's the same now. Um, so you have to, this is basically saying that, especially when you're a representative of the Dharma, but all of us are, right? Especially if you're Dharma practitioners, your friends and family know that you're Dharma practitioners. You may not be ordained, but to some extent, you still represent the Dharma. Not the same way that a monk or nun does, but to some extent you do. You shouldn't ever put yourself in a position where others from the outside could be like, oh, that's what the Buddha Dharma teaches? How inappropriate, right? You don't ever want to do it. Now, the Dharma is more powerful than any of us. We can't actually harm the Dharma in reality. Nothing I do can harm the Dharma, but I can cause others to lose faith in the Dharma. And that would be terrible. That would be incredibly, incredibly unfortunate if any of my actions, intentional or otherwise, caused someone to lose faith in the Dharma. So that goes for all of us. We should just be conscious of how we exist in the world and how we're perceived by others. Now, I will say, this seems, I did see someone raise their hand. I'll get to you in a moment. Um, I will say this seems contradictory to the idea that my self-cherishing mind, which is often um, exp I is realized through the eight worldly dharmas, is seeking out my own popularity, right? Or seeking out to avoid criticism. So this seems like it contradicts that, right? If I want to abandon the eight worldly dharmas, then I shouldn't be motivated by seeking to abandon criticism, um, and I shouldn't be motivated, or excuse me, by trying to avoid criticism or seek praise and so forth. So this seems like it can be contradictory to that, but it's not, because the purpose of not wanting to be criticized and being motivated by wanting to have popularity and fame and non-criticism is about feeding your own ego and saying, I am important. Whereas this is saying, I am representing something much bigger than me, and I do not want to take away from anyone the opportunity to develop genuine confidence and faith in the Dharma. And if my activities do that, if my activities serve as an obstacle for someone else studying the Dharma, that is what I want to avoid. So it's not the same thing as self-cherishing. Um, so that's what this is teaching. And then the second half of 89 is just recognizing that I should pay respect to all the different teachings, which is to say the Hinayana teachings, as well as the Mahayana teachings, the Sutra teachings, as well as the Tantra teachings. I should recognize that all of those are the teachings of the Buddha. They're all valid, they're all important. And I should recognize that not all teachings are appropriate for all students at all times, right? So I should never provide more than someone is able to handle. And that goes whether you're a teacher or not, that we should only give people what they're able to handle. Um, so, there's an example of not teaching if there is a monk or a nun or a practitioner who is practicing the Hinayana vehicle and they are excellent at their practice and they're making great achievement, then teaching them bodhicitta may be inappropriate because it may totally upset their practice, right? And it totally may cause them to reject the Dharma because it is different than what they already knew. And there are some examples that kind of that are counterpoint to this. But in general, the point is we should not criticize any of the teachings of the Buddha. Any of the Hinayana, Mahayana, or Tantrayana teachings are all valid teachings, and they're taught to different students at different times. And we should not teach things that are inappropriate for the students that are in front of us. In the same way, we shouldn't teach emptiness to students that are not prepared to understand emptiness because they might misunderstand it. We just need to make sure that whatever we're teaching, and that goes for people who aren't teachers, like yourself, never give anyone more than they can handle, right? Always do your best to give people what they need, to push them to be the best they can be, to expand their mind and their understanding, but not in such a way that they're overwhelmed, right? So it's being conscientious of others' needs. Okay, there was a question I think I saw?
Uh, Thank you, Venerable. I got clarification with your latest statements.
Oh,
It's
okay.
about the
Okay.
yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Um, and that continues with verse 90 is in that same thing. I should not communicate the Dharma of a lesser being to one who is a vessel for the vast Dharma. I must not forsake the Bodhisattva way of life, nor mislead others by means of sutras or mantras. So that is just saying that if there are people that who are practicing the Hinayana, and they're following a Hinayana philosophy, then we should not um, overwhelm them with teachings that are going to upset their mind. And if there's someone who's actually practicing the Bodhisattva way of life, then we should not try to force on them Hinayana teachings instead. And this isn't, we have to remember there's a distinction, especially as we study Lamrim. There are the practices that we share in common with the lower scope and the medium scope. So it's not to say we avoid them, right? Those are all practices of the Buddha, and we incorporate them into our lives and into our practice. But we do them with a bodhicitta motivation. We have a Mahayana motivation. So even when we engage in those activities that are shared in common with lower scope practitioners or with lower scope motivations, we do so with a Mahayana motivation. So this isn't saying that anything that is taught um, by the Hinayana or by the lower scope is inappropriate. No, it's saying that whenever we engage in a practice, we should do so with a Mahayana motivation, and we shouldn't mix those things up. And then lastly, we shouldn't mislead others by means of sutras or mantras. It's very easy to kind of show off your level of understanding and you confuse people. You confuse them on purpose because maybe you don't know the real answer. So instead, you just start spouting mantras. You start saying, "Well, I'm going to quote this sutra," and then you can quote sutra till you're blue in the face, and it just causes people to get confused. And that was the whole point, right? Because you don't actually have an answer, so you're just going to talk in circles around them. Basically, it's just saying we should never give people more than they're able to handle. We shouldn't give any, even if what we want to do is share with them Dharma, if sharing it in such a way causes them to um, deviate from their own path of practice that is meaningful and is worthwhile, we should be cautious about doing that. And we shouldn't act in such a way that we shouldn't use the Dharma in such a way to confuse people. We should use it as a way only to benefit people and to help expand their minds and improve their lives, right? Um, Now, the next verses are about how we should we should look after other sentient beings by making sure our conduct itself is unsullied. And I think this is really interesting, right? That the way I look after sentient beings, the way I bring about happiness to other sentient beings, one of the ways is by making sure my own conduct isn't disturbing. So we had some of this in the last verses we talked about last week about not being too loud and not making noise that is unnecessary, not disturbing others' minds. And now these verses, the first ones, are about how to not pollute our immediate surroundings, right? So when I spit or throw away the stick that I use for cleaning my teeth, I should cover it up with earth. It is also shameful to urinate and so forth in water or on land that is used by others. When eating, I should not fill my mouth, eat noisily, nor eat with my mouth wide open. So this is just common sense. Like, don't do things that are inappropriate. And it's not because people might see you doing it. It's because the very acts of doing it are not respectful. And you're causing an environmental situation that is not pleasant for others, right? So you should always be watching your behavior, even when you're alone, to make sure that you're not acting in such a way that's disrespectful to others, disrespectful to the environment, because that environment is something that is shared by everyone, right? So here, at the time of the Buddha and at the time of Shantideva, you didn't have toothbrushes, but you'd use a stick to clean your teeth. So you'd have to use a new one every couple of days. So you have the stick that is filled with your saliva and whatever other grossness comes to your mouth. You shouldn't just throw it on the ground where people can see it. You should bury it. So it's not going to be upsetting to others, right? You shouldn't allow your environment to be polluted in these ways. This is all very common sense. I don't think we need more explanation here. But the important, I guess I will say, the important thing to remember is this isn't about worldly punishment, worldly judgment, worldly scorn. It's not about others seeing you do these things. By protecting the environment around you, you are acting with virtue, and you are expressing your respect for other sentient beings by taking care of your own, parcel of land, if you want to put it that way, by protecting your own immediate environment, that is a way of showing respect for other sentient beings. And that's actually a way to help work for the welfare of others. Even though you're not going out and telling them what to do, you're not showing off what a great person you are. Just by taking care of your own mind and your own environment, that is helping others meet with conditions that bring about their happiness and their joy, right? And then we can continue. It says, again, I should not sit with my legs outstretched, nor rub my hands together. I should not sit alone in vehicles, upon beds, nor in the same room with the women of others. In brief, having observed or inquired about what is proper, I should not do anything that would be disliked by the people of the world. Now, this is especially talking about those of us who are giving Dharma instruction. But whenever we shouldn't do anything that is going to actively cause a disruption. So here, when I'm sitting on a teaching throne, I shouldn't sit with my legs outstretched, and I shouldn't sit there rubbing my hands together or engaging in other behavior that can cause people to that are cultural markers of disrespect, right? So again, having your legs outstretched or rubbing your hands together, which is to say showing impatience, showing distress in that way, those are cultural markers that are disrespectful. So maybe in different cultures it would be different. So these aren't the letter of the word is not the most important part as as the meaning, which is to not show disrespect. And then 93 says, I should not sit alone in vehicles upon beds, nor in the same room. Now, this is not a great translation. It says with women of others. The Tibetan just says women other. And what that actually means is women other than my relatives. And again, that's going back to the monastic discipline where what is allowed for a monk um, is I'm not allowed to be in a room by myself with a woman who is not related to me or a nun. And even nuns, there's some rules about it. I'm not allowed to be in a car or in a vehicle or in a space with a woman by myself if that woman is not related to me. So women of others really should mean women other than my relatives because those are exempted. Um, so if I'm sitting on a bed, which is to say like not like a sleeping bed, but like a couch, let's say, I shouldn't be alone with women if I'm not related to them. And in the same way, I shouldn't be alone in a room or in a car or on a motorcycle like this. Now, again, we have to make exceptions sometimes. We have to do the best we can do. And the point of this is nothing to do with the women. It has to do with me as a monk. Um, a, not putting myself in situations that can cause me to lose my morality, that can cause my lust or my attachment to increase. So it's more about me protecting my mind. But then also, and more importantly, it's not putting myself in a situation where others can see me and they can have a mind of impropriety. They might think that I'm behaving in a way that's inappropriate, even if there's nothing going on. And again, this is very heteronormative behavior or teachings. So we really just have to say, don't put yourself in positions where your actions might cause compromise to others' belief in the Dharma, is what this is saying. Don't put yourself in positions that could allow you to generate minds of lust or attachment that could go against your own morality. Don't put yourself in positions that might be harmful to your own mind and to your own practice. So that's something we can all uphold, whether you're ordained or not. What those environments are going to look different, right? But don't put yourself willingly into a position that could encourage you, any of your non-virtuous minds, that would encourage you to maybe break your vows, whatever they may be, or that would allow other people to perceive you in such a way that they think that what you're doing is inappropriate, and then that then allows them or causes them to have inappropriate thoughts about the teachings of the Buddha. So that's pretty clear, right? The next two verses. So this is saying, I should not give directions with one finger, but instead indicate the way respectfully with my right arm, with all of my fingers fully outstretched. Nor should I wildly wave my arms about, but I shall make my point with slight gestures and a snap of the fingers. Otherwise, I shall lose control. Again, culturally, in ancient India, it was incredibly rude to point, right? To point at something was this considered inappropriate. So this is saying you shouldn't go against cultural norms, even if what you're doing is innocuous. If someone says, "How do I get to so and such a place?" You're not causing any harm by pointing, right? But if that's considered rude and inappropriate, then by doing that, you're allowing people an opportunity to have disrespect for you, disrespect for the Dharma, and you're upsetting their minds. So you should align yourself with cultural norms when those cultural norms are not inherently harmful, right? So that's what this is saying. And then the second verse is reminding us that we shouldn't engage in abrasive behavior, whenever it may be. And our minds are reflections of our bodies, and our bodies are reflections of our mind. So if you are waving your arms about like a crazy person, that's probably indicative of your mind not being settled, right? And if you're able to subdue your mind, then you're able to subdue the actions of your body as well. And so you should allow yourself to be subdued in body, speech, and mind, and having a subdued, peaceful way of being in the world helps others also subdue their own minds. And we know this, right? When you're around someone who's uptight and then there's like fidgeting and not able to sit still, it makes you anxious, right? So this is saying, don't do that, especially if you are representing the Dharma as a teacher or as an instructor. But in general, try to recognize that you have an effect on the world around you and on the sentient beings around you. So carry yourself with a level of calm and a subdued nature that reflects the subdued nature of mind that you are trying to cultivate. And then the last verse in this section says, just as the Buddha lay down to pass away, so should I lie in the desired direction when going to sleep. And first of all, with alertness, make the firm decision to rise again quickly. So we're often advised that when we go to sleep, we should model our sleeping posture on the posture the Buddha took when he laid down to pass away, which is called the lion posture, which is laying on our right side with our left hand on our hip, laying flat, and our head resting on our hand and pointing. I think we should be looking west or something. I don't quite remember. It's hard to sleep in that posture. I'm going to tell you. If you've tried it, it's not really comfortable. Okay. But this is saying more important than that is that when we lay down to sleep, right, we should be very, we should be very intentional. And before we fall asleep, we should set the mind that I'm going to sleep for however long is necessary to rest my body because my body is important. But my goal is to wake up, to be refreshed, and to continue practicing. Most of us haven't developed the ability to meditate in our dreams. Some people have, it's possible. Most of us are not there. I know I'm not there. I can't speak for you, but I have not accomplished any sort of dream yoga yet. And therefore, I'm not really doing a whole lot of Dharma when I'm sleeping. So this is saying, don't allow yourself the overindulgence of looking at sleep as being the best thing in the world. But when you lay down to sleep, your goal should be, I want to rest my body, restore my body as quickly as possible so then I can get up and continue actively pursuing my practice of the Dharma. And if you set that motivation before you fall asleep every night, you actually wake up more refreshed. At least that's what is we're told. I don't know. I don't get enough sleep to ever feel refreshed, so I'm not sure if it really works or not. The monastery isn't big on sleeping a whole lot at night. They insist that you can take that afternoon nap. That'll do you well. And I say, okay, yeah, good for you. I don't know about me. I have to say, I've been here 15 years, and when I first got here, 4 hours of sleep a night, I could make it work. Like it was something I could do. And then you hit mid 40s, and all of a sudden you realize that that's not possible anymore. Like, as a young whippersnapper, I never felt young when I came here, but now I look back on what it was like 15 years ago and I go, ooh, you know, you had such stars in your eyes, young boy. So much different. Take care of your body. This isn't saying that you should forgo sleep. This isn't saying that you shouldn't rest. This isn't saying don't take care of yourself. But it's saying that don't be overindulgent with anything you do and always be focused on how can you practice virtue and practice Dharma to the best of your ability, right? So you have to take care of your body because our body is the vehicle through which we practice Dharma right now. We don't exist as minds or floating heads in jars. We need our bodies. And our bodies allow us to do things like prostration. They allow us to do things like recite prayers, recite mantras. Our bodies are useful, right? So we should take care of them to the best of our ability. They're very precious, but we shouldn't overindulge them. And then verse 97 is the synopsis of this section. Although I am unable to practice all of the limitless varieties of Bodhisattva conduct, I should certainly practice as much as has been mentioned here on this conduct that trains the mind. So this verse is kind of one of the most important ones for me, right? Because this is reminding us that the practices of a Bodhisattva are infinite. They're limitless, okay? It's impossible for us as samsaric beings who haven't achieved any Bodhisattva ground, or level rather, to actually practice them all. So we should do the best that we can do. That we shouldn't allow ourselves to be overwhelmed. We shouldn't stress ourselves out because we're not perfect, but we should do the best we can do. And these practices that are talked about in this verse, or rather in this chapter, are all pretty simple practices. Nothing in this chapter has been overly taxing, right? It's be respectful of your environment. Be respectful of the people around you. When you greet others on the road, smile at them instead of frowning at them. Like this chapter has been common sense things you can do to live in a way that is beneficial for yourself and others. And the reason I think that's so important to remember is because this says this is conduct that trains the mind. Many of these activities that are mentioned in this chapter don't look like they're about our mind. Not being loud and not making a lot of noise and not eating with your mouth open, right? Smiling at people when you cross them on the street. That doesn't seem like it's about your mind, but it is. It's all about your mind because all of our actions are reflections of our mind. And so if we get into the habit of engaging in action that is causing distress or disturbance to others, that's because our mind is grabbing onto that disturbance and saying, my own happiness and my lack of concern for you is more important than the effort it would take me to engage in behavior that wouldn't cause that distress, right? So those simple things in this chapter are all about training the mind, even if they're simple external activities. That's why Lama Zopa released a guidebook about how to practice bodhicitta in everyday life. And he gave like little mantras to recite whenever you were doing any activity. And they seem silly, right? But like whenever you open a door, you think to yourself, I'm opening the door to liberation. And when you close the door, you say, I'm closing the door on the suffering of samsara, right? That seems silly. It seems very silly to say those things. Yet what you're doing is you are aligning your mind with those practices. You are making your mind, you are allowing your everyday activities, the very worldly activities of just existing in the world, to be tools to help train your mind. Because that's what this is all about. And once your mind is trained, once it's focused in the right way, then everything becomes a spiritual practice. Everything becomes virtuous. So this verse here is reminding us that these activities that were taught and explained previous to here in this chapter may seem like these small, worldly, inconsequential activities. But what you're really doing is the most fundamental practice of training your mind. And that is incredibly important. So, to the best of your ability, do as many of them as you can and follow all of the activities of a bodhisattva as best as your ability, as best as you can, recognizing that a bodhisattva's conduct is infinite. We can't do all of it because we're not bodhisattvas, but we can do the best that we can do, right? So that's what we have to try to do. Not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed, but not allow ourselves to be lazy either. And now this last section is called the last few verses are how to complete the perfection of the training of mindfulness and introspection and how to so it's the branch of perfection is called or perfecting or completing finalizing the trainings. So it's giving us more practical advice for things we can do. So verse 98 says, 3 times by day and 3 times by night, I should recite the Sutra of the 3 heaps, for by relying upon the Buddhas and the awakening mind, my remaining downfalls will be purified. So the Sutra of the 3 heaps is often better known as the 35 confession Buddhas. So it's the practice of doing confession to the 35 Buddhas. Um, it's called the Sutra of 3 heaps because it's considered to have 3 important parts. Not every scholar agrees what those 3 parts are, but Nagarjuna says that it's the heap of confession, and then the heap of joy, which is made up of rejoicing, and then the heap of beseeching the Buddhas to continue to teach in this world. There are other people that say there's a heap of dedication or a heap of homage, but the important ones, all of the commentaries I've seen include the heap of confession, because that's the most important part, right, of the confession practice, confessing to the 35 Buddhas, and the heap of joy, which is to say rejoicing in the act of having engaged in this purification practice. Now, to be fair, that is a lengthy practice. To do that 3 times in the day, 3 times in the night, that may be a little bit overwhelming for most of us. But this is reminding us that we should always be working to purify our negative deeds. So even if you're just doing a 7 limb prayer, 7 limb prayer includes homage, confession, prostration, rejoicing, beseeching, requesting, and dedication, right? It includes all of those 3 heaps plus more. Trying to do a daily purification practice is really important and really powerful. A practice that includes all 4 opponent powers that we've talked about before. A mind of regret, a mind of reliance, action of remedy, and then a mind of resolve. So we should try to incorporate purification practices into every day of our everyday practice. And that helps make sure that whatever downfalls, whatever negative actions we've done, will be purified. So that is one piece of advice that we're being given. So the Sutra of 3 heaps is a great way to do that. I'm not saying don't do that 3 times a day in the morning and 3 times at night. I'm just saying it's difficult to, but there are other things you can do as well to have that same intention, right, of purification. then whatever I am doing in any situation, whether for myself or for the benefit of others, I should strive to put into the practice whatever has been taught for that situation. There is no such thing as something that is not learned by a conqueror's son. Thus, if I am skilled in living in this way, there will be nothing that will be non-meritorious. Meritorious. This is reminding us that there is nothing unknown by the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, right? The Dharma contains all the answers we need to any situation we find ourselves in. So if we train our mind in practicing what is taught by the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as explained to us by all of our holy teachers, then no matter what difficulties we experience or what joys we experience, there'll be an appropriate way to respond to them out of our Dharma practice. And therefore, we can make every single thing we do become as Dharma. Everything we do is spiritual practice that is moving towards virtue and is propelling us towards Buddhahood. It doesn't matter what the environment is. It doesn't matter what is happening. The teachings of the Buddha, as exemplified by the activities of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, as taught by all of our holy teachers, they contain all the answers we need. So every situation, whether it's alone or whether it's in a crowd, whether it's for myself or whether it's for others, there is a teaching that tells me how to behave in that situation. So I should always strive to put that into practice. Whether directly or indirectly, I should not do anything that is not for the benefit of others, and solely for the sake of sentient beings, I should dedicate everything towards awakening. All of our actions should be motivated by bodhicitta, which is the wish to become a Buddha in order to benefit others. Now, that may not mean we're able to benefit them immediately, right now, in this immediate moment in time and space, but that should always be our goal, right? So if we're working on our own mind, if we're trying to tame our mind, if we're trying to get a good job, get a raise, if we're trying to get a new degree, all of those things can be done with the mindset that I'm doing that to benefit others. I'm not doing it for my own benefit. I'm not doing it because I want to have fame or popularity or I want prosperity. I'm doing it because I want to develop the internal and external resources that allow me to serve others to the best of my capacity. Everything we do should be with the intent to become Buddhas to help other sentient beings. Not even at the cost of my life should I forsake a spiritual friend who is wise in the meaning of the great vehicle and who is the great Bodhisattva practitioner. So it's just reminding us that having proper reliance upon our teachers is critical to understanding the path, especially a Mahayana virtuous friend, a Mahayana teacher are incredibly rare. The fact that we've met them is incredibly special. And so we should never neglect that we've had these wonderful opportunities. We should never defy their advice. And we should do our best to always rely upon a spiritual friend because they're the ones that are going to interpret the teachings and show us the path, right? So Lama Zopa Rinpoche calls the guru the heart of the path, right? You having proper reliance upon a teacher is the essence of what it means to practice in a meaningful way. I should practice entrusting myself to my spiritual master in the manner taught in the biography of Sri Sambhava. This and other advice spoken by the Buddha I can understand through reading the sutras. I should read the sutras because it is from them that the practices appear. To begin with, I should look at the Sutra of Akashagarbha. So this is referencing the Array of Stock Sutra, which is to say the Gandavyuha, which is the last chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is a very, very long sutra. And that last chapter, the Gandavyuha, is almost like a morality tale, or not a morality tale, but almost like a fantasy quest of this one monk who's seeking out the teachings of the Buddha, and he visits, I think, 30 different teachers, and every teacher gives him a new piece of insight, and then he goes on to that teacher to a new teacher who gives him a new piece of insight. And so we can read that as inspiration for how we can live in the world and how we can relate to teachers in meaningful ways. So the Avatamsaka Sutra or the Gandavyuha Sutra, Shantideva is advising as one that we can study and we can practice, but we should study all of the sutras because they teach us not only the Dharma, but they teach us how to relate to Dharma friends in a meaningful way. And both of those are important things to learn and understand. And then in addition, I should definitely read the Compendium of All Practices again and again, because what is to be constantly practiced is very well and extensively shown there. And I should also sometimes look at the Compendium of Sutras, and I should make an effort to study the works by the same two titles, composed by the exalted Nagarjuna. So, this is just again pointing us in the direction. The Compendium of All Practices is known as the Shiksha Samuchaya, and that is the other major text that Shantideva composed. in addition to the Bodhisattva. And what that is it's not an original composition, but as it's called a compendium. It's taking pith instructions from all these different teachings and commentaries and putting them together in one place. So he's saying that when you have doubts, looking at these pith instructions from all these different teachers that I have compiled is incredibly useful because it's always going to point you in the right direction. And in general, those masters and those teachings are all focused around the activities, the four activities of giving, which is to say offering both Dharma and material goods and protection, and then guarding, which is to say guarding your own morality and guarding your own virtuous minds, and then purifying, which is not only purifying your negative deeds, but purifying your mind so that is always steeping in virtue, and increasing, which is to say increasing all of your good qualities and increasing your insight and realizations. So giving, guarding, purifying, and increasing are the four main activities that are taught in the compendium of all practices, the Shiksha Samuchaya that Shantideva has compiled. But then he's saying sometimes, if that's too much, you should look at the compendium of all sutras, which is a compendium composed by Nagarjuna, which is again little excerpts from different sutras that he's put together in some meaningful way. So it's like, a best of hit, a best of list that Nagarjuna has put together. And then he's saying, and then you should make an effort to study the same type, the two titles composed by Nagarjuna. So in addition to the compendium of sutras, you should study the texts by Nagarjuna, which are the texts on emptiness, especially. Nagarjuna is also famous for having composed texts on Tantra, but here he's talking about the text on emptiness, such as the Mula Niyamaka Karika, the verses on the um, foundation of the middle way, um, which are very actually difficult to study. So we study them through their commentaries, right? Through Chandrakirti's commentary, the Madhyamaka Avatara, entering into the middle way, and through Tsongkhapa's commentary on that, which is illuminating the intent. But he's saying here that as part of your practice, right? Not only in order to tame your mind, you should rely upon a guru. You should look to all the sutras, which are all the teachings of the Buddha, to guide you and how to rely upon a guru and how to find meaning. And then you should also study these texts, which kind of bring everything together, right? These compendiums are useful things to practice. So this is just advice of different texts that are worthwhile practicing and studying. And then lastly, we say, I should do whatever is not forbidden in those works. And when I see a practice there, I should impeccably put it into action in order to guard the minds of worldly people. So again, this is reminding ourselves that the way we exist in the world affects others, right? The way I behave is perceived by others, and therefore I should behave to the best of my ability in such a way as to cause others to never lose faith in the teachings of the Buddha, but instead be inspired. I should act in such a way that is inspiring to others, right? Whether they're Buddhist or not, my behavior, my attitude should inspire others. And that is what I can learn from these teachings.
Yeah, Venerable, may I ask? Yeah, as you told, thank you for today's session. You mentioned about we should act, guard our mind of the worldly people, and also act so that we should impress, but we should not impress them also, right? We should not
What
be people pleaser, right?
what it's saying is that our behavior, if our behavior comes from a tamed and subdued mind that is in line with the teachings, then we will not impress others necessarily. That's not the point, but we will inspire them to then want to adopt similar behavior and similar attitudes. So we should be serving as sources of inspiration for others. So by guarding our minds, by engaging in a spiritual practice, by working to benefit others, then others will see our behavior and they'll see the way we exist and say that that is inspiring and the teachings that led them to that practice must be beneficial and therefore they will try to adopt similar spiritual practices, right? So it's not that we want to impress others. It's not that we want to have fame and glory, but we do want to encourage others to lead spiritual, meaningful lives. And we can do that by the way we hold our mind and the way we exist in the world, the way we treat
Oh,
others.
okay. And also like a benefit of other sentient beings. Like for example, we give a lot of things to the others, the needy people. Sometimes they might be already self-sufficient, but still they would ask for help. So at that time, we should be very cautious and do that analytical meditation and then help the right people, right? Not simply give away our hard-earned resources just
We
to
have to
any
use
people who are
wisdom.
already
Yeah, you're
wisdom we
correct.
have to use, right?
We have to use conventional wisdom, and
Conventional wisdom. Okay.
conventional wisdom that allows us to, when we want to we should always cultivate a mind that wishes to give endlessly, ceaselessly, without any obstacles, that mind. But then in practicality, we should be honest about what resources we have, what availability we have to give, and where it can be of most use. And then we have to rely upon our study, our experience, and our conventional wisdom to determine what can be most effective, both in short term and long term. We should always be trying to balance those two things. So there are some instances where making an offering or giving to someone is not really something they need at that moment, or it could be more useful if given somewhere else. And that is up to us to try to do the work to figure out if we only have the opportunity to make one offering, we have to see where it would be best served. So we always have to combine our wisdom with our skillful means. So skillful means being compassion, bodhicitta, and all of the practices that are associated with those, including generosity, and then wisdom, both conventional wisdom and ultimate wisdom, which is realizing the nature of reality. We always have to combine those two, right? We have to work together. So you're correct that we should always be working for sentient beings, but we shouldn't be harming ourselves in the process, and we should never or we should always be conscientious of what is the most benefit I can do in any given circumstance, and do the best we can do.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Venerable.
Okay, and then just to finish, we have two more verses that say the defining characteristic of guarding alertness is brief. In brief, is only this: to examine again and again the condition of my body and mind. So this is the summary of this whole chapter, right? Is that what it means to guard my introspection is to always be watching what my body and mind are doing and making sure that they are reflecting the teachings that I have studied, that I have meditated, that I have reflected upon, and that I have meditated upon. That the way I exist in the world is intentional, that I'm not allowing my afflictive minds to guide my behavior, but instead I am actively pursuing virtue, and that I am controlling my body because my body is observed by others and can cause them emotional or mental distress. And I am controlling my mind because my mind is what guides my body. It guides my speech. It guides all of my actions. And I'm making sure that everything I do is done in order to benefit others to the best of my ability. I'm not allowing myself to be caught up in my afflictions. I'm not allowing myself to be overwhelmed by my negative minds, right? And then the actual meaning, the last verse is considered, quote unquote, the actual meaning of this chapter, which says, therefore, I shall put this way of life into actual practice. For what can be achieved by merely talking about it? Will a sick man be benefited merely by reading the medical texts? Which is the heart of our practice, right? Is that just study isn't enough. Just studying is only going to get us so far. That intellectual understanding is not enough if we don't then apply it, if we don't try to live in the world as best of our ability, dependent upon what we've studied. So that's why we should always have the aspects of study as well as contemplation, as well as meditation. That is how we transform our intellectual understanding into experiential understanding. And then we can apply it to our everyday life. We can apply it to everything we do. We can make all of our activities virtuous, beneficial activities that are helping ourselves and are helping other sentient beings. So I think that's the end of this chapter. I think that's we got through it. Are there any questions about this, about anything that we talked about today, or anything that's been covered in this chapter, or any questions in general? We have some time here at the end. Yes, go ahead.
Hello, Venerable. Thank you for the teachings. I had a question a little earlier, and maybe it's like a broader question. You spoke about how before we can have compassion for others and think of the well-being of others, we need to look after ourselves. And I sometimes find it very conflicting to decide when to put others first and when to put myself first. I was wondering if you had any guidance around that.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, I don't think it's necessarily true that in order to be a benefit to others and to wish for to have compassion, which is to say to wish for others to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, we don't have to take care of ourselves first, right? That's not quite what I mean. So the idea of self-care is something that's very popular in the 21st century. And I think that self-care and self-indulgence are often go hand in hand. So we have to be careful about that. What I was pointing at there, and I'll get more to your question in a second. But what I was pointing at is that renunciation, the mind that wishes for me to be free from suffering, for the mind that renounces samsara and all of the delights of samsara because it recognizes them as nothing but suffering. That mind is important because if I don't understand what suffering is in my life, then how can I observe others suffering and want them to be free from suffering? And the mind of compassion is the mind that wishes for others to be free from suffering, as well as the causes of suffering. So I need to be able to identify that suffering in my own life. And then by identifying it in my life, then I can realize that if I don't want suffering, of course others shouldn't suffer either, and I don't want it from them either. So you see how the two build in each other. Now it's possible if we already have a sense of suffering, so we can see others, especially others who are experiencing gross suffering, like coarse suffering, whether it's illness or sickness or poverty or things like this, and we can immediately know that we want them to be free from that, right? Even if we're not experiencing it ourselves at the moment. But in general, the better understanding we have of suffering, the better we are able to then wish for others to be free from it, if that makes sense. And so renunciation, the wish for ourselves to be free from suffering of samsara entirely, is a strong foundation for that. Now, to your question, when it can be hard to determine when to be taking care of myself or when to be dedicating myself to others in a meaningful way, and where is that line, right? When am I putting too much of myself out there and neglecting my own needs in order to help others? And so it's something we have to be aware of. I think that if we are watching our minds clearly, then here, as an example, it's still popular, but when I was in grad school, that was right around the time this idea of compassion fatigue was very popular. And there's a lot of work for people who were in doing psychotherapy work, as well as people that were in caregiving positions, such as nurses and other care-oriented roles, where there was a problem called compassion fatigue, where they were giving too much of themselves and not filling themselves up enough, right? And then they were burning out, basically. It's a type of burnout. Buddhism says it's impossible to have compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue means that you're not actually motivating, you're not actually working out of compassion. Your compassion, or what you're perceiving as compassion, is mixed with something else, because compassion is inherently giving and it doesn't expect anything in return. So compassion fatigue comes when you're not actively satisfying your own needs in such a way that you're expecting something in return for what you're giving. Does that make sense? So I don't deny compassion fatigue is a real thing, but I'm saying that it means that your compassion is a little bit not as purified as it could be. So then my advice here is always analyze your motivation, and then always analyze what resources you have available to you. And if you're actively motivated to eliminate other suffering in the short and long term to the best of your ability, then you say, what is the best way I can do that right now? And recognize that if what I'm doing is causing harm to myself, or if I'm depleting my own storage bank, therefore I'm not going to be able to get up and do this again tomorrow, then I have to mediate, right? Because samsara isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And so that means finding the balance. And unfortunately, there's not an easy answer. It has to do with analyzing, looking at your own mind, looking at your own resources, and not allowing yourselves to be indulgent or lazy, but also not pushing so hard that you burn out. And there's no easy thing to do except for reflection, except for meditating in the evening and saying, okay, this is what I did today. How do I feel about that? Did I feel exhausted at the end of the day? Did I still have more in my tank? Did I deplete myself of resources that I could have used in a different way? And now tomorrow I'm going to be struggling, or am I in a good place to continue tomorrow? Both external resources and internal resources, right? And so you have to just do the work of actively looking at your mind, your intentionality, and then the experience that you have when you engage in that service to others. And then by doing that, by doing the reflective work, the inner work, then you mediate your behavior, your external behavior, to match what resources you have available to you. Which is very it's not particularly Buddhist advice. It's just, you do the best you can do and you try to keep your tank filled while serving others as best you can.
Yeah, thank you for that, Venerable. And specifically, I was thinking of relationships where we tend to sort of, keep giving to keep the relationship going. And at times it leads to resentment because you've kind of given too much. So that, I think specifically that was the context I had in mind, that because, by coming from a place of resentment, I'm not really serving the relationship in a good way in any case. Yes.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Resentment is never going to be a beneficial motivation. But so then, um, and this is going to sound quite harsh, so I apologize for that. But if your act of giving, which is not reciprocated, leads to resentment, then it means it wasn't an act of giving because it was an act that expected something in response. Maybe not explicitly, but that's what, that's what I was saying. I've said before that when we say we love our partners, our family, our friends, that love is often mixed with attachment because we expect something in response from them. And therefore, that love isn't as powerful as it could be if it was separated from attachment because that attachment is always focused on ourself and our own needs. Whereas actual love is focused on others' happiness and the causes of happiness. So when we're engaging in active giving, we have to be totally separated from expecting results of that giving. And that's hard. It's hard to do when you're in a long-term relationship with someone, whether it be a family member or a partner or a coworker, someone you have to see all the time. It's very hard to do that because we live in the world, right? And we don't want to be detached. So there's a distinction between not having attachment, non-attachment, and being detached, right? Detached means we're zoned out, we just don't care, we're oblivious. We're not paying attention to anything. Anything can happen around us, and it's like we're in a stoned haze. That's what it means to be detached. We don't want that. We want to be aware of everything around us, but we don't want to be attached to the outcome. We don't want to be attached and clinging to anything outside of ourselves as if it's an actual source of our happiness or our suffering. We have to recognize that our happiness, our suffering, our grief, our despair, our joy all comes from our own mind. And as long as we're seeking it outside of ourselves, even in those people that we care about, even in those we love, it's never going to be real happiness. It's always going to be temporary worldly happiness. We can experience that, celebrate it, rejoice in it, but it's not real happiness. So if we're grabbing onto it as if it were, we're going to be unsatisfied in the end, right? And so we have to find that balance between non-attachment, but not allow that non-attachment to then devolve into detachment. That's the danger, right? To say nothing matters at all. It doesn't matter. You can be mean to me. You can abuse me. I don't care at all. It doesn't affect me. That's an act of detachment. Um, so it's not easy to do, especially in relationships that are important to us. So the first thing is, and also, and this is the difficulty of living in the world, right? This is the difficulty of samsara. Sometimes, if you are the only one giving in a relationship, and then if you're the only one putting in the work, then that relationship may be toxic and may not be something you can sustain. It may come to a point where you can't continue that relationship the way it is now because there's only so much, because we're not perfect. If I was a perfect, the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas can give endlessly and it doesn't affect their minds. I'm not there. I'm doing the best I can. But if I'm depleting myself and I don't have the emotional resources to actually keep giving in this way, because my giving isn't a pure type of giving, because I'm still have attachment, even though I'm trying to overcome it, then there might be a point where I say this is not a healthy relationship. And I have to change the contours of this relationship in such a way to protect myself and to protect the other person, that we are both trying to uh, living in a way that is in line with what I see as virtuous and beneficial. So sometimes we have to make those decisions, right? They shouldn't be abrupt or quick decisions. But sometimes, since we're living in samsara or not perfect beings, that's going to have to happen. But first, before we get to that point, we should observe, am I giving with attachment or without attachment? And if I'm giving with attachment, how can I be free of that attachment, give without expecting anything in response, and not be detached, not be oblivious? How can I experience whatever I get in response, acknowledge it, see what emotions it brings up in my mind, and then use that as a way to continue my practice and my relationship with this person?
Venerable, I
Does
have a
that
small doubt.
Thank you, Venerable.
Okay.
Thank you. That was
hold on
very
one second.
insightful.
Was that helpful? Okay, I'm good.
Yes,
I'm glad.
Venerable. Thank you so much.
Yes, Jyoti.
Venerable, yeah. Uh, when we analyze how the Dharma is affecting our lives, that means you analyze like how you were as a person reactionary maybe a few months back or a year ago, and currently you feel that you're somewhat in a better place. You're not so agitated anymore. There's a sense of pride which arises in this practice. How does one overcome this pride?
Right. So pride in general can be beneficial, right? If the pride is not saying, wow, look at me, I'm such a great person, right? You can notice that pride and say, hey, I've made practice in my practice. I've made progress rather in my practice. And that can be an opportunity for rejoicing. So you take that pride and you transform it into a mind of rejoicing that celebrates your achievements, celebrates your success, but then doesn't allow yourself to be defined by them. Doesn't allow your ego to say, hey, look at me. I'm such a good person. Everyone should pay attention to me, right? So that's what you have to do is you can be proud of what we've accomplished. We should rejoice in ourselves all the time, right? When we talk about rejoicing, it's not just rejoicing in the virtue that we see others doing. It's not just rejoicing in others' good activities. We should rejoice in our own achievements because that is how we fuel our practice by celebrating all of the major strides we've made towards Buddhahood, right? And we always talk, and I always talk about how Buddhahood is very far away. It's not going to happen tomorrow. We're not expected to be perfect. That's true. Yet, if you look at where you were when you first started practicing to where you are now, at least speaking for myself, I've come a huge distance between where I was when I first started practicing, between where I am now. And it may be true that Buddhahood is far away, but I have seen my practice transform my life in a meaningful way, and I can celebrate that. I can rejoice in that, and I can be happy about that. That doesn't define me. It doesn't make me a better person than I was before. It doesn't make me better than anyone else, but it just is something that I have noticed that then can fuel my continued practice. So we can recognize that pride and then transform that pride into a mind of rejoicing in our own success and then in our own virtue, and then allowing it instead of becoming attachment or self-cherishing, allow it to be fuel for further practice.
Yeah, Venerable.
Thank you.
Yes.
Venerable.
Yeah, Dr. Shruti. Yes.
Yeah. I had this question. You mentioned about how the monks have to behave so that it should not affect the layman's mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the monks have taken the vows and they have committed themselves. The same thing, even if a layman, for example, any relationship like a husband and wife or friends, they're committed. Once they're committed, they should see to that both, they need to they should follow those commitment rules like every marriage or any relationship they would have, right? So you could really following this dharma, it would really save a lot of relationships. And how do the people handle, like, in case if the partner or the a friend, they break the vow?
Mm-hmm. So it's a few different things. Firstly, specifically what I was talking about is as a monk or a nun, we are considered representatives of all the teachings of the Buddha, and therefore the way we act and the way others perceive us can cause them to have opinions about the Dharma in general. And that is why so many of our vows are about not disturbing the minds of others, because we don't want to allow others to have a misperception of the Dharma. So whether right or wrong, the fact that I'm wearing the robes of a monk, whenever anyone sees me, they think of me as a representative for all the teachings of the Buddha. Whether that is a valid or invalid perception, that is the truth of what it means to live in these robes. So therefore, I should make sure my actions are always in line with um, actions that are concordant with the Dharma and not cause people to lose faith. And that does change depending on your culture and your environment. I may be able to do something, go out on the street and do something here in India that I couldn't do in America or vice versa because their opinions about those things are different, right? So a lot of that is culturally defined. So that is what that is really pointing to, is that my actions represent whether I like it or not. I've chosen to become a monk, and therefore my actions represent the Dharma, and therefore I shouldn't ever do anything that could cause someone to have a bad thought about the Dharma. And as practitioners, if your friends and family know that you practice the Dharma, then even though you don't have that same responsibility as an ordained person, you still have some responsibility as a member of the community of practitioners. That if people look at you and they say, "Oh, that person's a Buddhist, and look at how foolish they are, therefore Buddhism is useless," that's not a good thing that you should cultivate, right? So that's what that point is getting at. Now, to your point, when we make commitments to people, worldly commitments included, as long as those worldly commitments are healthy and virtuous, then we should always be striving to uphold them to the best of our ability, right? So if that means the commitments of a marriage, or that means the commitments of a friendship, or that means the promises we make to our job, or whatever it may be, any commitments we make, we should do our best to practice them earnestly and heartfeltly to the best of our ability. Um, Obviously assuming those commitments are not causing harm, right? And that they are virtuous commitments. Now, when you're in a relationship with someone who breaks their commitments, um, I can't give you one specific answer. It's going to depend on the circumstance. I will say that forgiveness is incredibly important because forgiveness is us not holding on to anger and not us not holding on to resentment. It's one of our Bodhisattva vows for those of us that have taken them, is to forgive someone, and to not forgive someone, even if they've apologized, is breaking one of the root Bodhisattva vows, right? So having forgiveness is appropriate. That doesn't mean that we should ignore bad behavior. It doesn't mean we should allow people to engage in harmful activity, whether it's directed at ourselves or others, but it means not harboring resentment, anger, or a grudge towards them. And so, depending on what commitment was broken and depending on the consequences of it, you have to see how to respond to it. Like there's not like a single answer. But the important thing is not allowing that broken commitment on the part of the other person to cause you to generate a mind of anger or resentment, because that's not beneficial, right? So you can forgive them for breaking that commitment, but that doesn't mean you accept it, and that doesn't mean you allow them to continue causing harm or breaking their commitment again and again. So you have to find that balance, and then depending on the circumstance, you'll have to find a different or an appropriate course of action.
Thank you, Venerable.
Venerable.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so this was actually further to Kritika's. What got me thinking was actually more a cultural context in India. You know, we have this concept of this Mother India, all sacrificial, you know, gives and gives and gives. So, you know, I find that challenge every time in my extended family when, you know, I see, of course, I don't want to use the word, but I use this patriarchal mindset where I see this extended family. I mean, it's going on. I've seen my mother, my grandmother. It's always you know, there's always this compromise, even if you realize that you're giving too much. And you know, not taking care of yourself, even in today's times when women are working. So it's of course more maybe an Indian context, but I always find this challenge where if women are you know, so a simple thing, like if I take it personally, when I go on retreats, it's like, you know, of course my husband's completely, he says, yeah, he completely supports me, but extended family, oh, 3 weeks she's away, and you know, things like that. So there's always this aspersion cast on me as an ideal wife and a homemaker. So I don't know, it's of course very personal, but I always struggle with it.
You're not alone, and it's not an Indian thing. I mean, that what you're speaking of is an Indian thing, but it's the same in America. And the emotional labor that women carry is,
Yeah.
is so heavy and is totally unaccounted for, right? At least in most contemporary, even contemporary American contexts. Now that women are working equal to men, it neglects to recognize the fact that the emotional labor that women expected in heterosexual couples, especially the emotional labor that women are expected to occupy as a role of patriarchy and a role of the kind of misogynist culture that we have grown up in, that it's unaccounted for. So it's not alone. It's not an Indian thing. There's so much judgment for women, which is one of the reasons that we say that it is harder to be born in a woman's body than in a man's body. Not because there's any inherent quality about them, but because your life is a lot harder than my life. Like that's just the truth of the way we live in samsara right now. So there's no good answer to it. The answer is that as long as you are able to continue practicing in such a way that doesn't allow those aspersions from your family to cause you distress, like great emotional distress, then you have to try to find the balance of living in a way that's meaningful to you, that's upholding your values. And sometimes that means, I know, especially in India, our relationship to family is maybe more important than in America. America, we're so much more individualistic that like we send our parents away and we don't want to look at them anymore once they get too old and require our care. As a culture, we do that, not as individuals, but that definitely happens. So the commitment to family is stronger, I think, in Indian cultural landscape. And so it might mean sometimes that you have to put up with family just being critical and insulting, and then smile to them and realize that they are doing the best they can with the resources they have. And their resources are shaped by their worldview. And what they're trying to do is encourage you to be what they think is the best you can be. Now, you don't agree with their opinion. You don't agree with their perception. You see that their perception is clouded by ignorance and by their own suffering. And therefore, you can recognize that their actions and their motivations are good, even if they are confused. And therefore, that's an opportunity to try to develop compassion towards them and mediate your behavior in such a way that doesn't compromise your own values or your own intentions, but also isn't casting judgment in a way that is harming them. And sometimes you have to find that compromise, which is not easy, but sometimes that's the best you have to do, whether it's due to patriarchy or just due to the other complications of being in family or being in relationship, right? That we have to find compromise. But the important thing is when people, especially our non-Buddhist family members, criticize us and criticize our behavior, we realize, or never mind non-Buddhist, when anyone does, recognize that if they're criticizing our acts of virtue and our practice of virtue, it's because they want happiness and they don't want to suffer. And they think that their critiques are going to bring about happiness for themselves. And we see that they're wrong. We see that they're causing suffering to themselves and causing suffering to others, right? And so their actions are harmful, but they think that they are bringing about benefit. So they're grabbing on to suffering and believing that it's happiness. And that should do nothing but allow us to cultivate compassion for them. We see their suffering, and we see that their suffering causes them to harm us and harm others, and more importantly, harm themselves. And that's hard to do when you're being harmed by someone. But that's the most important practice you can do is when someone harms you, you use that opportunity to cultivate compassion for them because you realize that the harm they're causing themselves is infinitely greater than the harm they're causing you. As it was mentioned earlier in this chapter, the worst they can do is harm your ego, harm your self-cherishing, harm your pride, or at the very worst, harm your physical body. But the harm that they're causing themselves is creating negative virtue, or excuse me, negative karma that's going to cause them to be reborn in lower realms and have more suffering over and over and over again in the future, right? So the harm anyone is causing themselves is much greater than the harm they're causing you. And in the same way, the worst I can do is the worst harm that I can experience is caused by my own mind, not by others criticizing me, not by others physically assaulting me, not by anything external to me, right? So with that in mind, we use their harm as an opportunity to develop compassion for them. And unfortunately, we have to find a way to balance and compromise because we live in samsara and we don't live in a perfect environment. So we have to take whatever comes to us and incorporate it into our practice to the best of our ability, which is painful sometimes, but also that those painful experiences allow us the opportunity to grow deeper into our practice, right? And so even
I
as
think I
an
need to be
example,
more aware and skillful about as a response. I don't know. It's kind of an activist thing where I tell the women of my extended family, kind of wake up, do something. I mean, you've been wanting to do this and not wanting to do because your husband's not allowing. So even my husband says, "Why do you get this activist role of you doing it, do it?" So I
no,
think yes, it's
I
just.
don't, no, 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 don't
I'm
misinterpret me. I
sorry to
think that's great.
take
I
everyone's
think
time. I'm so
I
sorry.
I think we need to encourage the change we want to see in the world. And if you
Yeah.
see people, I don't think there's anything wrong with activism. I've been an activist my whole life, right? I think we just have to be skillful. And there are some
Yeah.
people who you can give that advice to, and it's going to maybe motivate them to help and be and exist in a way that's helpful. Others, it's not going to be helpful. So as long as we're skillful, then we should be
Yeah.
doing work like that. We should always be striving to make up to allow others the opportunities to be the best they can be, whatever that may be, whatever religious path, spiritual path, worldly path, whatever that may be, we should encourage others to always be pursuing virtue and to develop good hearts. And that
Yeah.
means eliminating their obstacles, both worldly and inner obstacles. But we have to be skillful in advice we give. That's all.
Right. Thank you. Thank
I
you so
think,
much. Sorry for taking everyone's time. I think
no,
I'm.
that's okay. Hopefully, I think that's a good
Venerable, I
question.
wanted to share one incident. So, like for example, the
Thank you so
activist you
much.
told, right? We should be skillful. So,
Hmm.
like for example, in the Hinduism, the traditional Hinduism, the women are not allowed to read Vedas. But the school I studied, where we were taught Vedas. So recently, like in one of our family gathering, so we had the priest chanting, and the women were allowed to chant one type of shlokas, and Vedas were not allowed. So they had secluded, but it was open. So then I made sure that I need to bring a change because Vedas can be chanted by women. There's no description. So then I skillfully went and I sat and I chanted what I had learned during my childhood. So then I could instill, like, some change that knowledge is for everyone.
Hmm.
As you
Yeah,
said, I'm just trying to connect.
when I don't, the Buddha was radical. The Buddha went against the expectations of society at the time, right? He gave up all the things that the society said he should be embracing, and he was quite radical. We say he went against the stream, right? In common parlance, we'd say the Buddha is punk rock. Like the Buddha did not do what was expected of him. He did not accept the status quo. He went totally against the status quo. So that is something we should embrace, right? Because the status quo is suffering. The status quo is samsara. However, we just have to be skillful about doing it. And that is the important thing. And we shouldn't be causing harm in the process. So I rejoice that Dr. Shruti, that you were able to do that and inspire others. There could be some circumstances where if someone else in a different circumstance has done that same thing, they just would have caused a whole lot of anger and caused a disruption, and it wouldn't have been beneficial. So we have to allow ourselves to use, like we talked earlier, conventional wisdom to say, how can I be helpful here? And it may be causing a disruption is the best way to be helpful, right? Protests exist for a reason. Civil disobedience exists for a reason. So maybe that is the biggest benefit, but we have to be skillful and we have to do it intentionally. But the Buddha was a disruptor. The Buddha went against the status quo. He didn't accept what was told to him as being the way to be. And so that is something we can embody, but we have to do it using wisdom and compassion as what is motivating us. If we're not motivated by compassion, we're only motivated by our own ego. That's not going to help us, right? That's not going to
Yeah.
help anyone. So we have to be skillful and we have to be wise, and then we can exist in that way. But
Yeah.
that's the whole point of the Dharma, right?
Yeah, and also we had proof that women can chant those Vedic Sanskrit mantras, and they were women rishikas. Actually, they are called the Vedic scholars. So yeah,
Yeah.
so thanks very much for listening to my experience.
Yeah, it's wonderful you're able to help inspire others in that way. Okay, I think that's a good place to end. It's getting right to our time. So I rejoice that we finished chapter 5. Next week, we're continuing. Next week is also online, and we'll be starting chapter 6, which is, one of the most famous chapters, chapter on patience, chapter teaching us how to deal with our anger, which is overwhelming in the world right now. So I think it'll be very useful for us, or at least it'll be useful for me. I look forward to it. Let's take a moment now to recognize that our study together today has generated some merit. We've created some virtue, some virtuous karma. And then instead of wishing to keep all that for ourselves, we want to make our practice virtuous in 3 ways, which is to say virtuous in the beginning by having a strong motivation of bodhicitta, virtuous in the middle by actively seeking out the Dharma and practicing with intention, and then virtuous in the end by dedicating our merit to benefit other sentient beings. So let's develop the wish that whatever merit we've accumulated, instead of ripening in our own happiness, may it ripen in others' happiness. May all of our merit be given to others, that they might be free from all suffering, that they may achieve everything they wish that is in accordance with the Dharma, that all of our holy teachers may have long and prosperous lives and continue to display that all of the institutions of the Dharma may continue to benefit other sentient beings, and that we ourselves may quickly become Buddhas so that we might be of maximum benefit. May any merit we've accumulated today ripen towards those ends. And with that, we'll offer these dedication prayers. The first verse we'll recite in Tibetan, and then we'll continue in English. Yang Shu Sem Chorim Po She Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyu Chi Ke Wa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gon Ne Gon Du Pil Wa Shor. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, to the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equally in the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. Great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Venerable. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Can we all please stand in prostration, please, and end the class? Thank you all. Next week as well, we are online. We are online next week as well. Hi, Kritika. And we will only be offline and in the center the weekend after that. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dee. Bye, everyone.
Kritika, can I have a word with you, like on
Sure.
call?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Bye, guys. Happy weekend. Happy Mother's Day to every sentient being.